All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Flora, president of NACM Business Credit Services in Seattle. We have a lot of people with us today, which is great. I especially want to welcome those from outside of Washington, Alaska, Hawaii. I see a lot of people from the Midwest, the Southwest, and other parts of the country, and it's great to have you with us today. A few months ago, we did a fraud seminar with Michael Williams from United Transactions. Had to do with mostly check fraud, and as well as some credit card fraud. And during that conversation, he talked about an aging relative who'd had fraud on his account. And he talked to me, and I had my 99-year-old mother had it as well. And that began this whole discussion about whether we do a program like this today, even though it's out of our normal credit wheelhouse. There's a lot of people in our world that are dealing with aging parents. And in our own office, we have, I think, 4 or 5 people that are facing some of these challenges. And so we decided to put this together, and I invited my good friend and one of our partners to participate today. Paul Viren and I have known each other for a lot longer than I'd like to think about. I think we both had more hair then. And in recent years, the last 7 or 8 years, he's been handling the 401k program for NACM Business Credit Services. And he's also handling the management of our investment pool and doing a great job for us. So, and he deals with a lot of people that have aging parents, in my case, a special needs kid that requires a special trust, and a whole lot of other things that revolve around family needs. And so it was easy to turn to him to ask him to do this. And so we're going to kind of tag team a little bit on this today and stuff a lot into an hour. We're not trying to sell you anything, so I'll tell you that right up front. If along the way you want to have a discussion separately about people we may know that could help you, we're glad to do that. And I'm thinking of family law and that kind of thing, but we're not in the business here today necessarily to recommend anybody, but we can. I think we've both got good resources to help you if that's of need to you. So again, if you've just joined us, please make sure you're muted. We are recording today. And you can also, if you would, use the chat bar to submit any questions, and then we'll bring those up throughout the meeting or at the end. And then we can have a discussion at the end that's sort of a free-for-all. So with that, Mr. Viren, the world is yours.
Thanks, John. Nice to meet all of you on the call this afternoon in our Zoom meeting with folks at NACM Business Credit Services. Great to be with you all this afternoon. As John mentioned, John and I have known each other for a long time, and we've had the privilege of also seeing our parents age about on parallel tracks, and from very vital, successful parents to parents that are now frail and struggling in a lot of ways. As John mentioned, I'm a financial planner by trade. I have a real passion for estate planning and for the need to help our clients and their families deal with aging and the dynamics that go along with that. So what we're going to learn today is, I'm going to get this on our little slideshow here now. So we're going to learn a lot today, I think. We're going to learn about some practical communication tips to speak with parents about their aging and needs for support. And I should mention, by the way, I'm not going to read all of the PowerPoint slides. I call it death by PowerPoint. The reason we did it this way is because it is a resource for you to take this PowerPoint and maybe use it with your parents, use it with your siblings, use it with your colleagues at work. We find that this PowerPoint tool might be simply just a checklist of things to consider as you're working with your family and your colleagues to best use for them what might be helpful for them. So we're going to cover about communication skills, what basic information you should have in place for yourself and your parents should have for themselves, that you might want to make sure you have access to those documents for helping them when that need comes. To discuss what is probably one of the most important documents you'll ever have in dealing with the parents, called a POST form. Every state has something similar to that. I'll show you what Washington State's POST form looks like, but every state in our union has a similar document that you should become familiar with because it will be your lifesaver for your parents and for yourselves. Begin preparing for an emergency and the information you'll need to gather together prior to having a crisis, and to make sure you do a few fire drills before the actual fire occurs in your future. And so many more things we'll be covering today. So some facts that we know about parenting our parents is that 40 million of us are caring for our parents. And it's a lot of individuals that are going through that. A lot of parents are coming back into the household and living in that Walden's kind of experience where we have multiple generations on under one roof. 17% of the children are directly caring for elderly parents, and 23% of adults between the ages of 45 and 64 are caring for an aging parent. I see many clients defer their retirement or give up many of their productive retirement lives, those early years of retirement, to care for an aging parent or parents. And that can be a challenging thing for so many individuals where their hopes and dreams for a successful retirement are now put to the side because of having parent needs that are maybe more pressing at the present time. So let me tell you my story. Just giving you some context about what I'm living with and what I've been living with for the last several years. My mom passed away just 2 weeks ago at the age of 91, almost 92. She was in a care facility, wonderful care facility on hospice for about the last 18 months. I will tell you, the hospice folks are angels on earth, as well as the care providers in her care facility were caring for her last many months on this earth. And my dad, my parents were divorced over 50 years ago. My dad died this last December at the age of 90. And my stepmother, who is in her early 80s, deals with mental illness and is really having a tough time with her bipolar disorder, living independently, but is struggling every day with her mental disorder. And my father-in-law, Bob, who is 89 years old, he lives in Western Washington in a care facility. He's been in this care facility now for over 4 years, and he deals with severe dementia, and is costing him about $15,000 per month to live in this care facility. Fortunately, he has long-term care insurance and is provided for that. So, but his quality of life is certainly not very high, and is struggling deeply because of that. And it's been challenging to just observe that and to see that occur. John and Shannon, John's wife, tell the folks on the call your story, John.
Sure. Well, I'll start with my mom. She'll be 100 in about 6 weeks. And for the most part, she's led a very healthy life until about a year ago, I guess now. She was living independently, and then we realized that dementia had crept in. And while her long-term memory is pretty good, her short-term is pretty useless. She knows who we are, but she was not in a position to really be caring for herself anymore. And so we moved her into a memory care unit. And as is the sign of the times with probably much of the work we all do, the care facility can't hire enough people. And then there are more and more people that want to try and age at home. And so they don't have enough heads in beds, and they can't hire enough people to run the place, and they're losing a lot of money. So they're closing at the end of the year. So I get to move her one more time, and I'm not looking forward to that. I don't know how she'll adjust. She had a hard time adjusting moving into her new facility. It's smaller, and she was a very, very active walker. But she is now dealing with shuffling, and we're having to do some physical therapy. She's finding it hard to believe she's 100 years old. And that'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. And we've actually met with her financial planner to make sure we've got enough runway to pay the bill, because she's close to $7,000 a month in services and facility rental, if you will. And that's with some long-term care. I can take a little bit off that, but we have enough to get her through to 110. If she's still around after that, then I guess she'll be moving into my guest room or something. We'll figure it out, or we'll look at Medicaid or what have you. My father-in-law is a 91-year-old who has Parkinson's, and his brain is functioning quite well. His body's falling apart. So we've often said if we could put the two of them together, we'd have a perfect person. And he's sliding slowly, but still with it. And fortunately, he's a retired pilot, so he's got a decent pension, which helps. But his costs now are up over $11,000 a month. And so a lot of what we deal with here is figuring out how to pay for all this stuff. And you know, it sort of keeps creeping up. And so we'll talk more about that as we go, but that's the short version. And I guess just to add on to it, and those that know me also know that I have a special needs kid. And so while we deal with grandma and grandpa, we also are looking at what her long-term needs are, which also adds to the financial plan question. And so, you know, we just spend a lot of time dealing with people like Paul to make sure it's all going to work out in the long haul. So, Paul.
Great, John. Thank you for that. And for those on the call, we certainly welcome you to use that chat box to maybe share your story. Maybe just briefly to say, my parents are ages whatever, living independently. I'm caring for them every day. They live in the basement or upstairs or in the house someplace. Whatever your story is, we welcome those stories just to share and to have us all have empathy for each other, because it's a very, very common scenario where we're finding ourselves dealing with managing parents and their needs that might be where they might be facing. I should also mention in the chat box, John's going to be monitoring the chat box. If you've ever done a PowerPoint presentation on Zoom, I can't see your chat box, so John's going to be kind of the monitor of the chat box. So as you're asking questions that might come up, John will triage those questions that you might have in there to see if they're relevant for that particular conversation we're having at the time. You'll just jump in and we'll answer that question at that time, or we'll save those questions to the end. And speaking of timing, we understand there's a hard stop at 1 o'clock, and then I'll be on the call for as long as there's people that have questions. We can help navigate some of those questions individually, or if you feel the need to chat with me afterwards or independently, that's fine. As John mentioned, I'm not here to sell anything. This is simply a service John and I are very passionate about the NACM members, as well as just you as an individual. And so want to be of help as we can in those situations. So aging and parents, obviously these are, you know, things we don't need to be surprised about. Parents are living longer with more chronic health conditions. They're trying to be independent, sometimes living alone or with their children. Income and assets may be limited. Trying to drive, which is, we'll talk about that more in a minute. Vulnerable in many ways, which is what kind of led us to this conversation about fraud and the challenges of adults being taken advantage of. I've communicated to Adult Protective Services for my family several times over the last couple of years. They're an amazing organization within every state has something similar to that. And it must be a very, very sad place to work. So vulnerability is a key thing, and how do we as children of our parents help guide them and protect them from themselves and or predators that might be trying to scam them out of some dollars, or certainly out of credit. And then private with sharing information with children. We will always be our parents' children. We still sometimes to our parents think we're still 13 or 14 years old and don't have competency. And so our parents sometimes are reluctant to bring us into the fold because of that generational gap between our parents and ourselves. They still see us as the child versus us now taking a role of helping to parent our parents. And that can be a challenge to try to communicate that role shift that is occurring in our families' lives and our parents' lives. I wish the communication was easier. Communication is key, and it's difficult. I will say from all the years I've been doing this, which is nearly 28 years professionally, and just dealing with my own family, I realized that I have to be more patient in communicating with my family. And I encourage that for you as well on the call. Sometimes, especially I think individuals that are part of NACM are trackers. We're kind of like, get the job, how hard can this be? This is as easy, let's check the box, let's get the spreadsheet out, we'll crank this out, let's get it done. Many times our parents don't work that way. They're slow, methodical, and are not driven by that. And so we that are taskmasters, we have to take a pause and just be careful to not over communicate or take too much control away from them. But it is important to find out who is the key point person for the family. And when it's not clear, or that point person shifts from being the favorite child to the not so favorite child, then all of a sudden we get this shift where there might be multiple siblings involved, that the parent is not communicating to all the children clearly or equally. That can be a challenge and be an upsetting thing. So I think being clear who is the direct communicator with certain tasks, and to have a family meeting. And if you've never had a family meeting where there's an agenda that your parents have created and that they're in charge, and you give them a sense of control, and that takes a little bit of coaching and encouraging. And I always think of it as trying to, as we all age, we begin to regress back into those early ages of our lives. So imagine trying to communicate to a 6 or 7-year-old about that first or second grade homework assignment, where you're trying to encourage them to do that work themselves. Sometimes we have to do that with our parents. It's that psychology role we have to play in trying to sell them or encourage them to see this is their idea, it's their thoughts, it's their process. Watch for warning signs. Many times we all deal with events, and events are opportunities, and to watch for those strange behaviors and car issues, and hopefully nothing serious has happened, like a fall or a car accident, that leads us now to having a more serious conversation that ends up being an intense conversation. Because when an event occurs, like a car accident, all of a sudden the parent realizes, just like a 16-year-old wrecks the car, things are going to be a serious conversation. And when the serious conversation is having to be had with a parent, things cannot be very friendly, and it can be cause a lot of challenges and stuff. And so the very first phrase of this whole slide is to be patient, to give some space. If things get out of control, say, hey, let's talk about this tomorrow. Let's get a nice rest. Let's just come back to this another day. And be careful about crossing the line, because communication can be really a touchy thing, because what you're eventually going to be having to do is to take control from your parents, and that's an issue. Hot
Paul,
buttons.
Paul, if I can jump in real quick on
Please.
that. My dad died 25 years ago, and about a month after he passed, mom called me, and she was 75, I guess, at the time. And she said, we need to go see the attorney. I said, okay, why? And she said, well, I want to redo the will. And she said, I want to make your life easy for when you have to deal with all this stuff. So we met with her lawyer. She changed up a few things, nothing major, but brought it up to date. He did what he needed to do to make it current. We were able to have a very good conversation about things. And about a dozen years later, my older brother passed away unexpectedly. So I'm it. And so we went back to rewrite it at that point. And, over that time, we've been able to have a lot of good conversations and deal with a few things that really needed to be dealt with. And conversely, my in-laws weren't quite open to those discussions. And had my mother-in-law outlasted my father-in-law, it would have been a miserable discussion, just a miserable case. In his case, he was ready to have us take it over. And so that communication thing is really, really key. We have a couple of things off the chat. One is, and I'm just going to read these. Mother was living over an hour away, is still capable at 87, but was needing more and more help, is now living in our home with us. We have another here. My mom is currently living in a facility that has agreed to accept Medicaid. She was approved for Medicaid back in May, but is still on a waiting list, quote unquote. In the meantime, 5 of us adult children are making up the shortfall for her rent until the Medicaid comes through. Is there any way to find out when she will be off the wait list? We can't seem to get any answers, but we've heard she could wait years. Is that correct? Got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Medicaid is really a challenge. And I know that every state in the country is dealing with the huge expense and cost for the caring of our elderly parents, and there are very few Medicaid eligible beds if she's in a facility and needing significant assistance. So the facilities social worker is where you need to go to determine what that's going to look like. I find most facilities will simply wait to receive remuneration from the state to play catch up for the bills that might be running up for that care of that parent. Each facility is a little different in that respect. So for you as siblings to go to your parents' aid Financially is going above and beyond maybe what is necessary, because what if you don't have the resources, then the facility is the one that has to be kind of on the hook to do that. And so some of it depends on the contract that your parents or mom had maybe signed with the facility to say, hey, if we can't, everybody's kind of desperate to get mom or dad in the facility, you'll sign anything to take them on. So you may have just inadvertently in the fine print said, if mom can't pay for it, the rest of the family will take care of their cost until Medicaid is accepted and is approved. So Medicaid can take months and to get approved. If there's a spend down element within Medicaid, that can be a challenge. If the social worker has no clue within the facility, then I would go see my recommendation, if my family or family or client, would be to go see an elder law attorney. Most communities have those. I'm a part of an association that has attorneys all across the country. So if you need to refer a lot to someone, I can certainly help find one to you, and you can get that through John, or at the end of the slide, or as the email that Connie sent out to you, you'll have our contact information and the information that has been provided for you already in preparation for this meeting. So I would certainly, if you go to the attorney, then you're paying the attorney some fees, but it may be necessary to get the estate planning elder law attorney involved to help navigate some of the Medicaid stuff that is going on with mom or dad, rather than you just paying forever into the facility, that may never come about. So I'd start with a social worker at the facility. No answers there. Look at the contract you signed. No answers there, or seems unclear. Then go see the elder law attorney. Other questions, John?
Let's see. I have one here. We have only one parent living now, a mother-in-law, 86, living independently, although we move in with her when she isn't feeling strong. We go there every night to have dinner, watch some TV. She doesn't drive, and COVID has been so difficult. And and I know Paul has had the same experience with parents that are in any kind of facility. Some of them are like a cruise ship that never leave the dock, so they're lovely. But the fact remains they've been holed up in there for over a year and a half, and it's been miserable.
Isolation. Lots of isolation.
Terribly isolating. And if they have any kind of mental issues, it's just driven them down. And I've seen that with my mom. And so, hopefully things have started to open back up, but it's a real challenge. So I feel for you on that one.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you're there to kind of lend some support and keep your parent independent. I think all of us want to, as if we were to architecturally design how our end will be in those last few years of our lives when they may be not so productive, to be able to live at home is obviously what we all want to do. And that's obviously what society is trying to drive people to stay at home, because of the cost of institutionalization is so expensive. To have a home health care aide or someone there is helpful. I will share with you, though, that I think finding a home health care agency that is staged and ready to go, that has already interviewed your mom, knows the scenario of the home, knows what the house looks like, that the house is safe, would make recommendations to maybe add grab bars and remove carpet, add carpet, whatever might be the scenario in that particular home environment, to make sure that home health care agency is queued up, ready to go. So if there's a fall or something happens where they go to the hospital for a day or two, come back home, that agency is already queued up, knows who mom is, and can be there to jump into the mix of that support. And there's many, many home health care agencies. You see them advertised in every community. If you're in a smaller community, that may be more difficult, but I would certainly be preemptive in that discussion and getting mom to interview that agency, to know who the people are. They know who she is. It's all been pre-orchestrated and designed and prepared well in advance. So obviously these hot buttons that I have on the screen now are all issues we deal with. I think the decluttering is probably one of the more critical ones. Oh, I beg your pardon. Is one of the more critical issues, because we've all dealt with my mom, fortunately, was decluttering before she passed. So when we had to move her belongings out of her facility, it was a pretty simple process. But it's not always the easiest, because we've done that. We've moved her 3 times over the last several years. So it's become diminished, but we all have a lot of stuff. We're all hoarders in some phase, some element. I know John's a super hoarder. And so I know I speak to him, but I know his parents have had to kind of declutter a lot, and he'll tell stories that'll kind of curl your hair as well. Well, what hair John has left. So moving on to the next screen.
Yeah, if anybody is interested in antique dolls, I'll make you a really screen.
Yeah, there you go. So home, cars, boats, and planes, and obviously independence and control. The control word is the most critical word your parents are going to want to have. I want to maintain control. And the keys to the car will be the most difficult conversation you'll have a parent have to decide, because that's the ultimate giving up of control, at least the first phase of giving up control. If they voluntarily turn in the keys because they had a close call, then you're very fortunate. Many times the doctor will be the one that has to be the bad person to say, hand me over the keys because you're no longer competent to drive, and myself as a healthcare professional cannot let you get in the car to leave this doctor's office today because you were incompetent. And I see it all the time. And if the family has to be the one to do it, that's really going to be painful. Have a third party be the person to do that. And I mentioned some of this before about staying at home. Is it home safe with grab bars, flooring, stairs, the life alert systems, all those things? Get that system in place, whether they have a cell phone in their pocket or an easy phone, some other sort of way to communicate to the family something's going on. And then to tour and put a deposit in a retirement or assisted living community is a good backup plan, and or to get that home healthcare agency involved ahead of time so that they know who mom is and what the next steps are going to be in their case. So I'm going to switch gears from kind of the soft, feely kind of, emotional communication things to kind of just some of the documents that each of us as living individuals should have. All of these documents in place for ourselves, for our kids, and for our parents, for us to take care of those affairs. And there are several documents. These are kind of in order. So wills or revocable living trusts, these are synonymous. Each state has specific rules that might be more advantageous to do a will versus a revocable living trust. Some family situations also provide for that. Don't overthink either one or which one should I have. Just either one will work fine in every state. And then who is the executor or trustees in that document? You should, if you're caring for parents, like the individual whose question you posed about it, going to visit mom, do you have a copy of her will somewhere so you know who's in charge if something were to happen? These are the wills and revocable trusts. They're going to come into play after the person has passed on. After that parent is deceased, then that will is going to be a part of it, be the critical thing. But while our parents are alive and we're dealing with them while they're still active or inactive, the powers of attorney are vitally, vitally important. I believe, and most of the attorneys I work with believe, that there should be two powers of attorney, one for healthcare decisions because of HIPAA laws that we're all way too familiar with, and the complexity of HIPAA. There should be a separate power of attorney that has HIPAA language specifically listed in there. If your parents' powers of attorney are over 10 years old or even sooner than that, but no more than 10 years old, they're probably not going to be valid in the state that you live in. Or if your parents have moved from one state to another state, those documents are very state specific because of the laws are specific to those states for their own state unique nuances when it comes to privacy of healthcare information. And who are the appointees for that, what they call attorney in fact? Who is that attorney in fact, the power of attorney holder that's going to be able to come into action? And this is really key, this active or pending disability. Most of us, like my power of attorney, where we have my wife or our daughter is pending a disability, that person can come into play. For elderly individuals, I always universally request that the parent, the aging individual, make that power of attorney active now. Doesn't mean that aging parent can't take care of their own affairs still, but it does allow for the child or the appointee to act without having to have a specific event, that they can be put in, they can take care of it, they take care of details now rather than having to wait for some judge to say, yes, your parent is incompetent, you can take care of those things. And this may be a different appointee for healthcare decisions rather than financial. So it may be a different attorney, in fact, for the financial power of attorney. So for the power of attorney financial, again, state specific, unique rules that are required there. If it's over 10 years old, it's probably worthless as far as being able to be as active and be able to engage. Also the active versus pending. You can tell if you have a copy of your parents' power of attorney that you have in your possession, you can read in the very first paragraph or two, it'll say, this power I grant this individual is active immediately today, or it'll say it's pending my becoming disabled. And so it's pretty clear language, not too complex as far as the reading of that. But if it's pending the disability, then I would certainly encourage your parents to update that to make it current law and also to make it active today. There might be a question about co-powers of attorney. Not uncommon for healthcare decisions where, like my sister and I were co-powers of attorney. If I'm on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean and I can't be reached, then my sister could act as that power of attorney for healthcare. So their co-power of attorney for healthcare is pretty common. For financial, it's usually one key person will be in charge with the backup to that individual as well. The directive to physicians, we all know what these are. That's the living will, Terry Schiavo, pull the plug document. Critical to have that. I'll spend a few more minutes about the POST form. This will be important for us to chat about in more detail in a moment. So no, the POST form is vitally important. And then beneficiary designations for retirement accounts, annuities, and insurance, life insurance. And so the will has nothing to do with beneficiary designations on retirement accounts. Very rarely, or it shouldn't be listed as the estate as the beneficiary for retirement account, insurance, or annuities. Very, very bad. So, but you should have a copy of who the beneficiaries are for your parents so you know exactly what they read, because that is going to be what they call a non-probate asset. These assets in this bullet point here are critical to have them detailed properly. That if a child is a beneficiary, they've gotten married or remarried, that last name may be changed, that may screw everything up. So just make sure they're current and active and that you have a copy of that. And to where can you find the originals? If your parents have those in a safety deposit box, someplace safe and stored, is that safety deposit box accessible by a child? Are the signatures on that safety deposit box those that need to have access up in here? Because if many parents don't have just themselves listed as the signature on that safety deposit box where all the important documents are kept, you have to get a court order to get the bank to release the contents of that safety deposit box. Well, that's going to take some time. Imagine in the COVID world. So make sure that any of the originals can be found. If it's in a safety deposit box, that you as the appointee, if that's your role, that you have access to that safety deposit box as a signature. You signed a signature card, as well as you know where the key is for that safety deposit box. Or if it's a safe at home, the combination to that safe, know how to get into that safe regularly and know where that stuff is at. That's where the family meeting comes into play sometimes, where you want to maybe review with your parents where all this stuff is kept, so that there's no misunderstanding about where things are kept and who's going to have access to that stuff. And know the name and contact information for their attorney, so you can access them and contact them if there's a need.
Well,
Questions, John? Yeah, please jump in there.
For a minute. Actually, can you roll that slide back for a second?
You bet.
Just from experience, when I moved my mom last year, and I thought I had everything in place, but when it came time to deactivate her telephone, her cable TV, they wouldn't talk to me until I provided this document. And that seems pretty innocuous, but you start down the list of all the different accounts your parents have, and in order to deal with it, you have to be the guy in charge. And that seems, at first you just go, oh my stars, but then think about your parent, particularly if they have any kind of memory issues or technology issues, trying to deal with the cable company and the phone company. They're hard enough for us, and dialing 1 and dialing 5 and doing all that, they can't do it. And so you need to have that kind of stuff done. We have one person who chimed in here a second ago who says that she has a durable power of attorney, both for health and financial, and that was helpful when dementia came into play. She didn't have to have her doctors declare her mental state, and I was able to take over her affairs. The other thing I'm going to mention on the safety deposit box, when my mother-in-law passed away 6-7 years ago, a cousin called my wife and said, oh, by the way, I'm a signator on a safety deposit box with your mom. Nobody knew about it. Nobody knew what was in it. My father-in-law had no clue. He was not happy when he heard about it, but none of us could get in it. And that's the way the laws are written. So The cousin came out, he brought the key. There wasn't anything particularly exciting in it, but just that whole headache of trying to get into that darn thing. And we had to do some unraveling to combine contents with their other safety deposit box.
Right.
But that was one that nobody planned on. So for what that's worth. And then let's see, I have another question here. In general, especially for larger and or blended families, do you feel it works best when a family member acts as an executor or a neutral party like the bank or attorney? I've seen both tear apart families.
Yeah, it depends on, well, if it's an attorney, I find that third party individual, if they're sensitive and caring, that's fine. But if there's hostility in the family, it can be a real mess. Because somebody's going to get their feelings hurt. Somebody's going to feel like they got short rift. Somebody's going to get pissed off somewhere along the line. And whether it be a third party person, it's almost better for them to have the headaches rather than, than the middle sibling all of a sudden having control, and all of a sudden everybody's pissed off at the family member, and now we don't have Thanksgiving together because they all got pissed off at the sibling. So I think a third party is important, whether it be a trust officer or attorney. That's their job, and they're going to do it by the book, and so there's no ifs, ands, or buts, and so that can be a little bit easier that way to kind of see what is popping up there as far as the dynamics on that. So yeah, good question. Yeah, tearing apart families is a real common thing, and usually it's over the precious cuckoo clock that was great grandma's cuckoo clock, and cuckoo clock was always, my mom always wanted that cuckoo clock to be my cuckoo clock. Well, she said the same thing to all 5 kids. So then it's left to you to do that. I've seen where their parents have put little Post-it notes on the back of all those items that would say, well, this is John's and this is so-and-so's. Everybody's got their little sticky for all the stuff. I was going to use a different word, all the stuff in the house. And nobody cares sometimes. Sometimes the stickies get rearranged inadvertently because one of the controlling kids takes, I've heard all the stories in the world, so I can go on all day long. But
yeah, the other thing I'll mention, my wife and I are executors for a couple of friends who have no kids, and there isn't much family, but there's still some family, but they had no one that I guess they trusted to turn to for that. So every now and then I'll hear a family story from some of these people and just think, oh my stars, what did we get ourselves into? We're doing it to be nice because we like these people, but are we going to run into something when the day comes? And but we signed on, so we're there.
So the PULSE form I've mentioned a couple, 3 times already in our brief conversation together today, and the PULSE form, as I mentioned, is a vitally important form. If this is the first time you've heard of such a form, become really familiar with it if you have aging parents. So PULSE is an acronym that stands for Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. I'm going to show you a copy of one that's the Washington State form. As I mentioned, every state has one. In our state, these are created by the various medical associations in every state to correspond with the Attorney General in those states to make sure that they're legally viable. Sometimes it can be deemed as being assisted senior suicide, if you want to put it that way. Both my parents and my father-in-law and my stepmother have this form. This form is also attached to the documents that Connie sent out to you today, so you have a copy of the front and back page. It is sometimes called the DNR form. You cannot get it you can't get it online. These documents are provided by the doctor. That's why there's this bright green form. The doctor, the primary care physician for your parent, be the one to sign the form. That's this section down here that somebody's going to sign on this form as the attending physician that communicated what that patient's wishes are. So is it do not resuscitate, do not provide any intervention when it comes to my breathing. And then there's a signature spot on here on section 2, on section D on the back of this is also withholding antibiotics. So for people that are in serious end of life type stuff, and the care providers are required to give them antibiotics unless they've signed a PULSE form that they do not want antibiotics to take care of that UTI, that urinary tract infection, or to take care of other maybe chronic infections that are occurring that they're feeding them by antibiotics. Antibiotics are angel's worst enemy because they keep those patients, those that are supposed to go to heaven on earth, for too much longer, in my opinion. So become familiar with this form. If you're in a state, obviously you're not in Washington State, and you're in a different state, just Google physician's order for life-sustaining treatment or something similar to that, and you'll find your state-specific form that will be unique to your state. And this is the document sometimes you hear about is posted on the refrigerator of your parents' home. Because this is a first responder form, your parents, when they get, if they call the aid people to come in and help them with a fall or a stroke or something happens, they're going to ask for this form. This will be key for them to decide if they're going to pull out the paddles and start pumping on mom or dad, or to intubate that patient, because if they don't have this form, they're required by law to give every sort of emergency aid they can to that individual. And it could be very, very painful for that individual, and they don't want any of it. This is the way for them to avoid all that, but it has to be prominently displayed on the refrigerator, someplace easily defined, and for those first responders to act in accordance to what the wishes are of that patient. Okay, I don't see any questions there, John. So insurance, oh, insurance is such a fun thing. So I know we got about 17 minutes left before the top of the hour. So you should know what your parents' Medicare and their supplement are. Be active with your parents in their annual open enrollment for prescription drug Part D, so that they know what they're doing. It's so complex, and if your parents have any sort of diminishing mental capacity at all, even I have a hard time managing this stuff, and I have about 90, maybe 70% of my capacity is still there. So for parents trying to navigate that, imagine them trying to do that online, and they don't have the competencies to do that. Seek out agents that are in your area to help with the Medicare decisions about what supplements to have, and also work with the pharmacies that they have as well to know what's going on with their pharmaceutical needs that are going on. And obviously we're hearing all kinds of crazy stuff with pharmaceuticals. And if you're not navigating the pharmaceutical world with your parents, you need to be involved with that, because they sometimes will overprescribe medications that may not be necessary. And you need to know what that drug list is that your parents are on. I'll go to that in a minute. If a parent's a veteran or they'll have special benefits that they need to be aware of, so you need to navigate that to know what that's about in case you're called in to be that active power of attorney holder, that attorney in fact. For car and home insurance, if they're still driving, make sure that they have an added liability umbrella policy, at least for $1 million. So if they plow into that school bus, they've got plenty of insurance protection to cover against those sorts of things. Just the liability protection that's on that basic car insurance is not going to be enough, especially if they're going to run into somebody in a sidewalk or something happens where they're not the most competent driver. Make sure that umbrella coverage is in place. That's vitally important. If they're fortunate enough to have long-term care insurance, and if you have parents that have suffered through this, long-term care insurance premiums continue to go up and up and up. And so a common conversation I have with clients is my insurance premium is going up by 20, 50, 100%. Do I keep it, drop it? What do I do with it? Know what your parents' coverage is. Make sure that you're listed as protection for unintended lapse notices. All the long-term care insurance providers are required by law to have the insured list someone so that the policy doesn't lapse unintentionally because of non-payment, that they'll reach out to you as a sibling or as a child to make sure that you're aware that that policy needs to get paid. Then travel insurance. I mean, we all have traveled, and I'm sure we've all been on cruise ships or in certain ports of call somewhere. And there's obviously a large aging population out there cruising around the world. And if your parents are one of those individuals trying to, pounce their way across Europe, do they have trip cancellation insurance? And also, do they have medical evacuation coverage or some sort of other policies that are going to provide for them more than just the trip cancellation? If they're traveling overseas, Medicare and the supplement pay nothing. They need to have a supplement specific for traveling in this country or overseas or Canada or Mexico or wherever they're going to make sure that they have that evac policies. I don't sell it, but my property casualty agent that we work with uses Chubb, CHUBB, and Chubb has a great travel insurance policy that my wife Beth and I have that we carry with us all the time when we travel, so we have additional protection in case we're in a travel crisis.
So Paul, before you go on, I
Yeah.
have a question here. Did you add a list of people that can walk through the pharma part of Medicare Part D?
I see the question there. I've actually figured out how to read the chat here, John. So did you add a list of people that can walk through the, well, I'll presume the question carried this way, that you should have the list of pharmaceuticals your parents are taking in case you're called upon in an emergency situation. Imagine yourself in the emergency room with your parents, and the first question the ER doc or the intake person is going to ask you is, what medications is your parent on? And they're stroked out on the table, and you're going, I have no idea what my parents are taking. And so now all of a sudden they're having to make a guess as to what sort of treatment they're going to give to your parent, and not have some sort of a reaction that may be harmful or fatal because they don't know what medications your parents are on. And so I'll go into the to-go kit. One of the things I'm going to be talking about in a second is the to-go kit. And on that to-go kit is to get a current, fresh pharmaceutical list that your parents are taking. And so as far as an agent, insurance agents, if you just Google in your area, Medicare supplement agents out there, there are licensed agents that are out there that provide long-term or that provide Medicare supplement advice. We work with a gentleman in Seattle that is our referrer out to that. Kevin Peterson's his name. That's all he does is Medicare supplement insurance. He's a great partner with us, and we just referred out to him, and we don't get any money for it, but he just does that work for us because it's such a subspecialty. And so every community typically has a Medicare specialist that all I do is Medicare supplements. Work with one of those folks.
Yeah, Paul, the other thing I'll acknowledge here is that as hard as I tried to be up on things, I learned a lot when we had to move mom. She has a long-term care plan. She's a retired teacher, so that was pretty well taken care of. It helps. It's not meeting everything, but it's not bad. She also has a home health care plan, and that one's not so good. And as soon as she moved into a memory care unit, they did not consider that her home anymore.
Right.
And so they won't pay anything. And so again, knowing what I know now, I should have engaged about 5 years ago to look at these things to make sure I knew about what's covered by the policy. So I would urge you to do that if they already have things in place, just to make sure.
Yeah, long-term care insurance management when it comes time for claim is really, really difficult. Like every insurance company, whether it be a tree that blew through your roof, or if it's a car accident or something, companies, they got to go through their protocol, and the same thing is true in long-term care. And your parents will resist that because that's giving up control. If they're going to have long-term care insurance pay something, that means they have lost some control of something, whether it be their ability to be mobile, ability to go to the bathroom, ability to eat, any of those ADLs, they call them, activities of daily living. If they can't do two of 6 of those ADLs, that means they're disabled, and nobody wants to, self-admittedly, I can't do those things. That's just how we're kind of wired as human beings, especially for parents that don't want to give up control. So money, is a tough topic sometimes if it's not been brought up by your parents to you voluntarily. Sometimes it's difficult for them to bring it up because they're embarrassed. And I've seen it over and over and over again where parents are afraid they're going to get micromanaged by their child, and the child's going to say, ask the question, well, why the heck did you do that? And that's the last thing your parents want to hear from a child is, why did you do this versus that? Because we all can have an opinion about whatever. But start with the basics. Who is their advisor? Who's their financial advisor or CPA? Who are those individuals? Draw upon them to know what's going on. If they say that things are great, then take that as gospel that things are great. If they don't have one of those individuals that worked with Vanguard or somebody's, just on themselves, then you got to be more active, because if they're doing it themselves, then it's going to be a mess. Especially now, there can be a mess because we have clients that have CDs in 5 different banks, so they're chasing after the next highest yield of 1.0% interest, and they got $50,000 CDs in 5 banks, and we don't even know where they're at. And so it can be kind of a mess to figure out where some of that stuff might be. Get a balance sheet, confirm the beneficiary designations, creditor protection, like we talked about. I certainly think it's important for seniors to freeze their credit. The people on this call obviously know how to freeze their credit probably, and I think it's important for parents to do a credit report. And if they're competent, or you can guide them through the process of freezing their credit with the 3 credit agencies, I would applaud you for doing that. That freeze thaw credit process has become easier now that Equifax got slapped on the hand, and now the feds have come in and said you got to make it easier for clients to freeze and thaw credit. And I think that's really vitally important if you want to protect them from having somebody scam their accounts or scam their resources.
Paul,
And
I'm gonna call it a disagreement with you a little bit.
Okay, please. Yeah.
On the financial advisor and CPA, I had a circumstance with my mom where she was using the same guy that knew my dad, and old Tacoma people that have been together forever.
Yeah.
And when I looked at the financial return she was getting, I finally said to her, we're pulling it from this guy. He's not paying attention to what your needs are. And we made a move. Things are good now. The CPA, she'd write a check, once a year, and he would send it on to the IRS. But one day I was a little concerned because I couldn't find copies of tax returns.
Hmm.
And it turns out he hadn't filed her taxes in 6 years.
Yeah, nice.
And, he's a CPA, you trust him, but he didn't do it. And ultimately, I had to kind of push real hard. I got him, she signed him, we sent him in, and I transferred the business to somebody else who spent the better part of 3 years unraveling some things.
Yeah.
So just because they are, licensed and chartered and all that sort of thing, if they happen to have been around a long time, they may have their own issues, and they're still in business doing their thing. So it's worth checking on those people and making sure that they're serving your loved one well.
Well, and I think that's a great point, John. And I think if you are the active power of attorney along with your parents and both have competencies, that I make sure to, once you get the information, who their financial advisor is and the CPA, send them a copy of the active POA. So that if you do call on your parents' behalf, there's not a surprise. They know who the heck you are. So there's not like, well, who are you and why are you calling me? And where's the parent? So that don't surprise your CPA or financial advisor. Because if I get a call from a kid in our office for a parent, my yellow lights go flying. So it's usually not a good thing. But doing that ahead of time before there's a crisis, then that's always a helpful thing to know what's going on with the family. So what's on the discussion list? So this is kind of that checklist I was mentioning before. So homes and cars, are we staying at home? Do we need to get rid of stairs? Do we need to add grab bars? Travel and travel insurance, what's that look like? Make sure they know where stuff is at. If they're jumping on a cruise ship, to know how to get a hold of them. Medical insurance, we covered that. The post form and the education about that. The to-go kit. So this go kit is important for your parents to have one of those in case they have to do it, or you should have a go kit if you're going to have to go to the hospital to meet them there. If you live in the same community, then that's important to do that. I see the question here, John. I'll come back to that in a second. Do the parents want to spend it all? I hear that not infrequently from clients. I'm going to spend it all. My kids have gotten everything they need. And to do that, giving money away to family and to charity is an important conversation that can be helpful and fun. Sometimes if there's a charitable philanthropic component to the family dynamics that can be helpful, that can add another wonderful dimension to the family, because we all of a sudden have a philanthropic aspect by which to, kind of surround ourselves with, about giving some money away to the various organizations your parents wanted to be a part of. Genealogy can be a crazy, goofy place. I've had some funny stories. I don't have time to tell it out about kids that after the fact discovered that they weren't actually the kids of their parents. So it was interesting things that you might find out. And burial and cremation plans, know what stuff has been prepaid, know where it's at, know who to call in case there's a more sudden thing that's going on, especially in the COVID world. We lost a client 2 weeks ago that was relatively healthy one day and is gone the next, and we're now having to play, firefighting. So it's been kind of crazy. I'm gonna go back to this question here. So what about the deceased parents and their credit? How do you freeze those? Well, when a person is deceased, their credit essentially is de facto frozen at that time. Notifying the credit card, like when my mom passed away here 2 weeks ago, the calls I made Monday morning after she had passed on Saturday, one of those calls was to her credit card company, her Costco card, and to Costco Visa. And I said, mom passed away. And she said, as of this moment, her card is frozen. Nothing can be done on that card. And so that card is potentially there. So if somebody tries to open up an account for her, they'd be pretty hard pressed to get any action out of that card after the date of death. So not too difficult there. I think writing a credit report for a parent, if they're failing and or at the time of death, is not a bad thing, to see if there's other credit cards that you're not even aware of, but they may have opened up at, Macy's or somewhere that, you don't have a clue about, that needs to be shut down to communicate to them that the parent has passed at that point in time. On home ownership, ask a parent that a reverse mortgage, they have different rules. They certainly do, and I haven't put reverse mortgages on this list. That's a great point. Reverse mortgages can be a really complex thing at the time of the second spouse passing, because there's now a lien on that house for the reverse mortgage holder that's going to want some money back at the time of the parent's passing. And so the house will be forced to be sold. It may be forced to be sold within a particular period of time. And to find out what the rules are about that home, if something were to happen, or if they're in that home, need to move into a retirement community, what happens at the time of that move? And maybe there's a child living in that home, which is pretty common these days because of the extended family caring for that parent. And all of a sudden that that house might have to be sold to satisfy the requirements of the reverse mortgage holder. So look at the different rules for that particular reverse mortgage they might have, and see what that looks like to make sure that there's not going to be any sort of surprises that might come up at the end of the day. So tools we need to use, I've kind of went through this checklist again, and all those things. I didn't cover love letters. There's some pretty cool tools out there that other than just writing a love letter, and encourage your parents to write love letters to their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to yourselves, to each other, and to put some of those handwritten things or written out documents so that there's some, that's the softer side of planning, of course, but it certainly helps ease the pain sometimes if it's truly a love letter, not just a, is really sentimental in the case of just sharing the love and affection for the family by that parent. And I think we're in the questions and discussion standpoint. So question came up about on cremation in Arizona, the parent needs to have signed a separate document. Thankfully, my mom had already done this. I was not aware of that. So thank you for sharing that bit of information for those that might live in Arizona. Yeah, cremation services, sometimes it sounds like some states, before those remains are put in to the furnace to be turned into ashes, that has to be signed off by the parent, but before they're passed on, so there's no surprises there. So questions, comments?
I'll add to that, to the whole death thing. Having been through it a couple of times now, the more you can do ahead of time, the better, because those guys tend to be, well, I liken them to used car salesmen, but they will take advantage of the emotion of the time of death. In my mom's case, she paid for everything 5 years ago. So it'll be, I make a phone call and that's it. And that was pretty much the case for my dad when he passed away, but the guy still tried to upsell everything. And it's really annoying. And my brother and I just weren't going to tolerate it. So, yeah. But it's all part of the conversation, and getting at it early. It can be a fun conversation and a pleasant conversation.
Right.
It really can. It also can be really awful. And Paul and I worked for an educational institution many years ago, and a couple donated or left their property to the institution. They hadn't told their kids about it. And ultimately, the donor intent was not met, and the kids sued, and there was no money left at the end. Nobody got anything except the attorneys, and that didn't do anybody any good. Yeah. The flip side is, there's some really great things that can happen. And again, my family's been involved in some of that kind of stuff, and it's really cool to see what some charities have done with money that has been left over from somebody. So those are, have the conversations.
So I did, in the packet of stuff that Connie has sent to all of you and is available, or I can send it to you separately if you'd like to, is this emergency contact form that has everything from what the car is that your parents are driving, who their physicians are, medical details about their blood type, allergies. Imagine how helpful this would be if there's an emergency where you get a call in the middle of the night because of an accident or something happened that you don't know some of this information. This form has things about if they have pets and who their vet is and who their pastor might be and who are the key people in their trusted contacts for financial planners, insurance, property casualty insurance, and so on, who their credit, all this information is really important to just know where this stuff is at. So this is a great conversation starter with families to say, and if you if you create this for yourself and give this to your parents, thinking that you want them to have this, at least some information for yourself, it might spur on them to say, maybe I should do that for you, child. And so it's just a great way to have some of this stuff that's been around. So anyway, use that as a resource if that would be helpful to you as well. And there's something similar to this is the password management list. And I didn't cover it. I should have added this to the agenda and to our presentation today. But it's digital assets. My mom was an active Facebook follower and user. That's been a real curse, quite frankly, because you can put that out there. I haven't put her into the inactive status. They have a name for it. I forget what the Facebook calls it. But if your parents active on Facebook or other social media or have other digital assets like frequent flyer miles or other assets that are out there, that can be it's another whole world of just navigating the assets your parents have that may be non-paper related, like like travel points or points that they had left over from using their Visa card or things like that. So all right.
Okay, so we are at 1:03. And so
Mhm.
at this point, if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, this is a great time to do it. I see a few people are dropping off, but a lot of you are still staying. So if you've got something on your mind, now's the time to just jump in and ask.
So, and there's a question on here. Can you talk about transfer on death? Yeah, I think you can do this with checking accounts. How do you do this? Can you do this with anything else? Yes. So TOD accounts or transfer on death accounts are really common. My mom had a transfer on death account for her investment account to my sister and myself. That does minimize the impact of probate if you're in a highly cost challenging probate state. So it can be a checking account at the bank or credit union, it can be with an investment account at Schwab or Vanguard or anybody. All of those, if you can do transfer on death accounts ahead of time, that really is going to save a lot of time. Where I find a fatal mistake happens, and I'll just make an example up. Let's say the parents or let's say the surviving parent had five kids, and you do a TOD account to make it easier to the oldest child who's the executor of the estate, and all of a sudden the oldest child gets 100 grand that's at the bank on a transfer on death. Well, what about the other siblings? What about the other 4 kids? Well, all of a sudden we've got a problem because the other kids are saying, hey, Bill, you encouraged mom to do this TOD account for 100 grand. Now it's in your possession. How are you going to get it to us? So that may be what her wishes were, his wishes were, but that can cause some problems if it's not done right. So the parent thought it was a simple thing to do is to put that one person on there, but it can really cause some problems. So make sure the TOD is managed properly and everybody knows what it is and who's on there. Same was true with beneficiary forms. TOD and beneficiaries are somewhat synonymous. The beneficiaries on retirement accounts or life insurance, yes, TOD and POD are the same thing. Yep. And so paid on death or transfer on death is the same synonymous term. But beneficiaries on retirement accounts or life insurance, a little different deal. Those are actual contracts that are that the account holder has with the insurance company or the institution like Schwab or Vanguard. And so those beneficiaries forms are a little more restrictive as far as how they're going to go to that person, and just they can't be contested, I guess, is the bottom line. So if I forgot to change the beneficiary from my ex-wife to my new wife, and I died, my ex-wife's going to get that life insurance or retirement account. It doesn't matter what my will says, it doesn't matter any of those other things. That cannot be contested because it's a contract between the policy owner or the trust, the custodian and the account holder. So be careful about that. Those things are current and up to date. TODs could be challenged in court and would have more success if there was an ex-spouse, let's say, listed as a TOD. Those could be challenged in court, or the will might supersede those TODs if that were to happen. So, okay. What about pros, cons of joint accounts? Yeah, so joint accounts are kind of complex. So there's joint tenants with providers with rights to survivorship. JTWORS is kind of the acronym. And so what that means, if my wife and I's accounts are joint accounts with right of survivorship, I die, Beth is the account holder immediately, no questions asked at all. She has to just prove to that person that I'm deceased with a death certificate. If it's a joint tenants in common, That means that it would go, my half of that account would go into probate, would be then processed in probate to then determine who is the rightful owner of that half of that account. If it's Beth, and that's pretty simple, Beth would get the account, but it would take some time to go through probate to get that money over to my wife, or if it's a joint account, joint accounts in Tennessee, then it would be, to a child, then it may have to go through court to do it that way, which is less complicated. Revocable or irrevocable living trusts. So revocable trusts are the most common. A revocable trust means that you can revoke the terms of the trust while that trustee, the grantor they call it, is still alive. So I can revoke it, change it, do anything I want to anytime during my lifetime. Irrevocable living trust is a little more complicated. So let's say that I didn't trust my wife because she had too much fun with the Nordstrom's card. And so if I die and I give my assets to Beth in an irrevocable trust, which is not uncommon, it can happen, but then I have my attorney be the trustee for that money, then that is an irrevocable trust. Beth can't touch that money. She can't use it for anything. There may be tax reasons that would make sense to do that irrevocable trust that way. But once it's set in motion, once I die, that trust cannot be, the terms of that trust must be abided by the beneficiaries, can't be changed. So it's not so much a matter of complexity, it's a matter of control. If it's an irrevocable trust, then it's going to be something that I put it this way, if I'm going to put it irrevocable because I don't trust Beth. And so trust means that I don't trust her more, it means I trust her less. And so that's the kind of the restrictions on that. Good question. Is it just you and me, John, or still I see still 24
Oh, no,
here?
we still have about 25 people here. So
are they asleep?
no, I think they're still going. And I guess if you want to keep sending questions, then that's fine. But let me just say that this was a little bit of a jump out of the wheelhouse kind of thing for us. Normally we do credit related things, but I sense that there was a real desire to have this kind of conversation. We're prepared to do more of these kinds of things if there are particular topics or subjects that you're interested in. We know a lot of people. Paul knows a lot, I know a lot, and while family law and family issues are not really NACM strong suit, we have resources available. So if you got things that you want to hear more about, and I've noticed a couple names here that like me have special needs kids, there are some unique things to that, and I have some people we can draw in for that. But if there are things you want to talk about, let us know. I'm happy to do that. It's it's a little different for NACM to do that kind of thing, but I'm happy to put it together. So don't hesitate to ask. If we can do it, we will. If we can't, we'll tell you. So.
And thanks, John and Connie, for allowing me to be a part of this, and Connie for your helping to facilitate some of the mechanics behind the scenes, and appreciate all of the team at NACM, wherever you might reside across this great country of ours.
Yeah. And if there are any, if you have any questions, we sent you the PowerPoint. If you didn't get it, let us know. And the contact information for Paul and for me is at the tail end of it. And we'll be happy to answer your questions later. So don't be shy about getting in touch.
And don't forget about the bottle. Don't forget the bottle of wine. That's always helps get everything through.
Yeah. The better wine, the better.
That is more important than anything. Believe me.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, John. See you, buddy.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.